But right now, here is SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey.
Hot Mic with Hutton with Row rolls on across the OutKick network with SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Always enjoy the chats when we have the opportunity here at SEC Media Days here across the OutKick network. Let's just jump right in. Reacting to your opening address for this year, the State of the Union for the Southeastern Conference, I thought it was very on point with your discussion on name, image, likeness, the call for more help with federal legislation. When you and I chatted via Zoom last year, I felt like, well, you're making progress. I didn't get the sense that we are now from that level. Is it frustrating? Did I catch the right tone?
No, I think there is progress as far as interest. You know, the issue is commitment to resolve the issue. I would anticipate, at least indications over the next 3 or 4 weeks, a lot of either discussion, drafts, or actual bills introduced from different sources, senators and House members. And I think the more and more of that activity that takes place, even though they'll be different, is an indication that interest is building, moving towards a commitment to resolve the issue. What we need is something to move through the committee process onto the floor. And
so we're not close.
We've not been successful. We're closer. I don't know what close actually means. I mean,
See, I'm picking up on that
well,
too.
You go
now.
back to like Schoolhouse Rock when I was a kid, and I'm just a bill. Yeah, I'm only a bill, and it's a process, and things don't happen rapidly.
I feel like you make things happen, though.
Well, I do think the time we spent in early June was highly productive. In fact, I walked out of those conversations with an understanding that there was more knowledge, more interest, asking of the right question, more engagement from staff than we've seen. I think that's progress. And whether or not I can predict the timeline is really immaterial. I have a responsibility to try. But I'm also mindful that you go back to the old Ronald Reagan quote that, I'm from the federal government, I'm here to help. You need to be careful about those words. But the reality I wanted to describe Monday is this is the why we need congressional involvement, and that's to have a national standard. Otherwise, you're left to have an effort at national competition with varying state laws, and that doesn't work very well.
You always speak in a way in your addresses that's very much devoid of ego when talking about the conference that you lead. But when you look at the state of the NCAA right now, which is very much in flux with how things are going with NIL, are you cognizant of the fact that you may be the most powerful person in college sports right now?
I'm asked that question, and I typically respond with great meaning that this is not a power trip for me. I need to be influential and effective. Those are the words that I use. And so the chair, the seat, the job title gives you influence. You need to use that well. And yesterday, in between interviews, I had a couple phone calls on key things where on one, some colleagues moved, I think, to a really healthy place that will slow some thoughts down, but also give us opportunities for the future. Trying to think about potentially being in D.C. again to visit. That's using influence and trying to be effective. It is a highly interesting time as you think about challenges to authority broadly, and the NCAA is right at the heart of that. And there are missteps that I could identify over time. You have a new leader in Charlie Baker, who is a Republican governor of Massachusetts, a blue state, so he figures out how to solve problems with different points of view. Charlie walked into a situation he didn't create. And I think we need a little bit of patience to see his effort, his ideas, and the NCAA is going to have to continually adapt to be more effective than it is right now. And part of it is we all have been slow to change. And I think there are reasons for that we could go into, but we all have a responsibility to be influential in our own way. I just happen to be in a really prominent role where I say things and all of a sudden they're on the ticker. Like yesterday's moment was I was asked on radio, would we rank 1 through 82 the teams and assign them to bowl games? And I'm like, sure, because I know that we'll have all the teams. Well, I don't even know what that means, just to be honest, but it was a nice answer, right?
SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey with us. You're also helping lead the way for the potential where 25% of all member institutions will be represented in the NCAA tournament, right? I'm against this. I think we're at a point where it's so competitive, even from the 16 seed playing the ones now. How many teams are you advocating for? Is it exactly 25?
No.
What's the perfect tournament for Greg Sankey?
So 25% came from a subcommittee of a bigger committee I chaired, and they were assigned to think about championship bracketing. We go back last July, I had a conversation with Pat Forty for Sports Illustrated, and I learned that whenever you begin an answer with, look, I don't want to make headlines here, you should stop yourself.
Right.
And
The headline will follow.
Yeah.
Right when you say that.
So the full background is I had spent the month of June in a set of meetings where everyone was afraid of things being taken away. Automatic bids, championship access, governance access.
For the SEC's gain or the Big Ten's gain. That was
Yeah,
also
whatever
part
the
of
perceptions.
It. Right.
And so, you think about, I'm not trying to take things away, but I don't think, things aren't remaining static. Let me give you two examples, the Big Ten and the SEC. Next year, we're going to be at 16. In men's basketball in particular, the Big Ten adds UCLA. If that's not the number one most historically successful program, it's in the top three. USC's done really well in recruiting. That means those two programs and other programs are going to experience more losses. Texas and Oklahoma have perennially been in the NCAA tournament. I don't need to hear, well, you don't have a 500 record in the Southeastern Conference of the Big Ten, you shouldn't be in. Those teams may be in the top 40. And so what we do is we provide access to automatic qualifier conferences that provides great storylines like Fairleigh Dickinson and St. Peter's. But this is a national championship of the best teams. And so let's go back a year when Ole Miss won the baseball College World Series. They were the last team in. Now the committee gets together and maybe they're the first team out. The last team in was good enough to win the national championship. And you really look at a bandwidth of probably the top 50. So to answer your question, I think about the top 50 programs across the board, particularly in men's and women's basketball, are really, really competitive programs. And in men's basketball, the competitive variance there is really, really narrow. When you say 1 versus 50, it sounds like a big gap. It's actually not. But we give up the last 15 or so of those spots to provide automatic access to conferences. That's healthy. But I think we can grow a bit. We can think a bit more beyond 68. I don't just go to 25% or 96. I think there are some different models out there that still provide access, so we're not taking anything away, but we make sure we have the best teams in the country with an opportunity to compete for the national championship. And I think that's a little bit more than what we have right now.
But whenever the NCAA completes a 3-year...
By the way, you're fine disagreeing with that.
Oh, I know that. That's why I enjoy talking to you, because I don't want to have Florida Atlantic have to go through again, I'll use Mississippi State in order to go to and face the one that they've already had the chance to upset. Or we could go back to a 14 or 15 seed that now might be playing a game that would be a version of Dayton, Ohio.
Another 14 seed.
Yeah, but you go back so this year to Mississippi State's opening round game. It was a buzzer beater. It was an end of game situation. That's great basketball. That's what you want, is compelling stories where people decide on the court rather than specifically in a committee room. And so those were top 40 teams playing that night. I think those are the kind of teams you want to have access. And what you have to remember is there are the stories about one being defeated by 16. So we've provided hundreds of those opportunities over time, and it's happened once, maybe twice. 15 versus 2, same sort of thing. So we're asking for that kind of opportunity, which are wonderful storylines, but they're pretty small occurrences. And when you look at the RPI, it is more likely that 11 beats a 1 on a regular basis than a 16 beats a 12, just because of the competitive gap and the statistical analysis. That's part of what informs my thinking.
You don't become a commissioner by not being a good salesman, as we just heard right there with SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey on that point.
I was just answering the question.
Yeah.
Innocently, with pure interest.
When you have a 3-year NCAA investigation that ends with one of your member schools, like in the case with Tennessee that ended recently, LSU, a long process that ended recently, do you also feel a sense of completion when those processes are over?
Well, certainly when something's finished, you feel that. But as you start talking about the time frame, I think the time frame is way too long. And this is not new. This is not about the Southeastern Conference. I think the fact we don't have resolution to the Kansas basketball issue is unacceptable. I think the time it took to figure out the post-FBI arrest matters, which was years and years and years. I mean, we had actions, I think, dating back to 2016 that weren't decided until 2022. That just can't be acceptable. What has happened is frequently when we've had these special committees, these committees have said, we need to be more aggressive with penalties. We need to be stronger, that we have to take stronger action. But we've missed the time frame. And what I think should happen is we should be more focused on completing these issues in timely manner. One, rewarding leadership on campus. And wouldn't it be awesome if a campus could investigate itself so well and hold itself accountable through change and maybe some penalty, punitive actions, that there's little for the NCAA to do at that point. And so I look at shifting the mindset, and this is not something new. I wrote a memo 3 years ago that's still under consideration to try to move these things along, because I think the lag of time is the biggest gap right now in the NCAA infractions and accountability process.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but your policy typically is to not interfere with universities and programs in their own internal discipline. Couple of difficult things at Alabama this year. Terrible situation with the basketball program. Jermaine Burton in the game against Tennessee also. Do you ever feel a desire to want to get involved in those things? Are you ever someone that would consult a university on what to do in a situation like that? Or do you completely step aside and let the schools handle those matters internally?
So those are two matters, but even over the last year, we could go campus by campus and list issues that one could say was the right level of oversight or accountability provided. You know, I have a responsibility for the role assigned to me, and that role doesn't extend to campus disciplinary issues. Should it? Those are interesting questions that we deal with. I think we've done a fairly effective job at balancing those issues. We just saw a report, I think USA Today had on how Title IX is applied. That's a federal law and federal policy assigned to campuses to administer, and it varies greatly. And so there's not uniformity across many aspects of higher education as people try, with I think goodwill and good faith, to address discipline and oversight issues, and they're hard issues.
Greg Sankey has been our guest. As we wrap up, I know you're an avid runner, marathons when you were younger. During COVID, you ran every single day, and there's a streak going, right? Do you still have that going?
No, I have 502 straight days of 35 minutes or more. I just finished a 15K, which is 9 miles. Running in Utica, New York. I had knee surgery, so it slowed me down.
Okay.
So
that ended the streak.
I'm still in the rehab.
Did that cause the end of the streak?
The stomach flu caused the end of the streak.
Oh.
I had worked through one stomach flu and said I'm going to force myself no matter what happens.
That sounds like misery.
I was like at day 280. I'm like, I'm going to go. And then when I hit 502, I was like on the floor, and I'm like, come on, one more day. And I'm like, maybe this is the sign you should just stop.
Very random here. Chad and I are all SEC fans, college football fans. The SEC on CBS, the SEC theme is iconic.
Yeah.
Do you get to preview whatever the new theme is about to be? Do you get versions of it and be like, yes, that's the Southeastern Conference?
So the amount of feedback over that music is fascinating to me.
It's like the NBA on NBC.
Yeah, and there's other music. So we've had initial conversations, more looking back. We're not going to take the music that's allocated or owned by some other network, so there'll be something different opening.
It's calling John Tesh is what that means.
Yeah, no, I would I'd see if Huey Lewis could come back and do something, or Darius Rucker. I don't know.
There's plenty of Southern music tie-ins.
A compliment to CBS is the way they set the stage for those games.
Oh, yeah.
And the music's part of it, the scenery, and the commentary that's part of the introduction. And we've had conversations with ABC, ESPN about how do we maintain that special feel as we're adding inventory to their world.
I know you said earlier, when you start something with, I don't mean to make headlines here. I'm not trying to insinuate anything.
That means, but we are, right? So
is your relationship with Tony Petitti better than it was with Kevin Warren in the Big Ten?
I don't know better or worse. Tony and I have actually had a lot of interaction since he's started. So it is, at this point, more active, I would say. And I think that's because of the timing and needs. Now, when Kevin first started, and this would be natural for me, the first couple of months was January, February of 2020. and we had plenty of interactions, and then COVID hit, and then we're all talking every week. So just a very different environment. Kevin and I texted over the weekend still, and he was congratulating me on my contract, and we kind of bantered back and forth. My wife and I became grandparents, was talking about, he's got work on a stadium you read about. So
Yep.
I saw Kevin in April at an event as he was transitioning out. So I think I have a friendly relationship with Kevin. He worked for Mike Slive earlier in his career. I worked for Mike. And, we may have viewed things differently from time to time, but I think we've always been able to maintain a healthy relationship.
You're always great to do this. We appreciate it, as always. And
It's
the event
tough staring at myself on the camera. That's the one time this happens the whole time.
We have to do it every day, and
Yeah.
every day it's not fun.
Well, you're just wonderful people to look at.
The sign of power is
And we got
whenever
Dan
you
Dockich
joke that
down
you
below.
haven't seen yourself on camera
The
before.
better part was the
There's
video
Dockich down
showing
there,
like
Look
a
at him.
woman climbing down a cargo net and falling that I saw.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows on that show? Who knows they were talking about?
Good to see you.